Anthony Grassi here for College.town at the 2026 NCAA Convention. Happy to sit down with great American Conference Commissioner Will Prewitt. Will, thank you for joining me, sir.
Hey, Anthony, really appreciate it.
So as we sit here right now, you are coming up on 15 years as a conference. I guess we'll start here. Thinking back to 15 years ago, what are the things that have happened in the last decade and a half that have been the biggest accomplishments in your mind?
Just really creating something from scratch, and really the heavy lifting was done by our membership. It had been a pretty significant amount of time since a new conference had been formed in Division II, but it was kind of a little bit of a leap of faith. I had worked almost 12 years at the old West Virginia conference. Really felt like my boss is going to probably retire in a few years. I'll move into this job. I grew up in Eastern Kentucky. I went to grad school at Appalachian State. Other than when I was an undergrad at Ole Miss, my whole life really had been spent in Appalachia, if my accent doesn't give that away. But, just kind of make that leap of faith to try to start something new. And, it's not just, it's great when we had, the first national championship, the first multiple bids in certain sports, but just to feel like you've had a hand in something that has been really positive for our 12-member schools. It's given so many student athletes the opportunity to win championships, to play in a regional framework that makes a lot of sense. You look at the landscape of Division I. Now we have UCLA playing in a Midwestern, traditionally Midwestern conference, or just some of the crazy things that it feels like that we're seeing that would have been unimaginable 15 years ago. But we're able to really have something that's regionally based. We have incredible rivalries. Travel partners make sense. We have such symmetry. 6 schools in each state, 4 public institutions, 2 private institutions in each state. And I don't know that I can really point at just this dramatic thing or that dramatic thing, but just the day-to-day of knowing that we've created some great experiences for our student athletes. We're able to support our institutions, administrators, and coaches. So it's almost the joys in some of the day-to-day things that you may think is a little bit mundane, but I think that's really where the work lies, and just to see that make a little bit of a difference in some ways.
As you think maybe over what the next year may bring for the league, what is your priority over the next year to keep the league advancing forward?
Technology doesn't stop. Yeah, I think that's maybe the thing that's by far the biggest difference from when I started in college athletics, and it feels like I've been in college athletics my entire life. I grew up in a small little Eastern Kentucky town where there's an NAI school. It's now the University of the Cumberlands. It was then Cumberland College. My uncle was the athletic director. My mom was the athletic secretary. First job that I ever had, I was 6 or 7 years old, had a booster seat to see over the scores table, kept track of assists and rebounds. Everything was pencil and paper then, and things really didn't change for a long time. And now everything has some form of technology, and really trying to help keep our schools, our coaches, to where we're keeping up. But you think about sports like baseball or softball, which used to be, the most high-tech thing about baseball was, the coach had a stopwatch. You try to time the, catcher from home to second, or what kind of lead a runner would get. But now, you think about, cameras for coaching purposes. All the technology involved in trying to, change a swing path or a pitcher's delivery. We see that in baseball, softball, football, the helmet communication, basketball, everything in the different analytical pieces, just making sure that we're keeping up, but yet, it's Division II. So you're limited, really. We don't have the blank check to write, but trying to make sure that we're spending those dollars in the right places. And just from a public perception of our conference and how people consume events from the Great American Conference, streaming, that's going to be maybe the biggest thing that we drill down on over the next year. And we're in the process of, we've sent out an RFP. We've been in a little bit different space than other conferences. We've left streaming rights in the hands of our member institutions. Do we want to bring those in-house? Do we want to go behind a paywall? And I think these are decisions that over the next couple of months that we're going to make, and then whatever decisions we make, implementing those, and it's going to have a long-term effect on the Great American Conference.
How has I guess two parts of the streaming question. How was the conversation, and if all the institutions hold all their rights, maybe everybody buying in to say, all right, we're all in this together? How difficult was that conversation? And do you have I guess in your commissioner chair, do you have a preference on trading maybe with the trade-off in going behind a paywall of exposure versus dollars?
Yeah, we're in a really, really unique situation. A lot of our streaming rights on our campuses really evolved from long-term legacy radio contracts. So we have multiple schools that now they're multimedia companies as opposed to just a radio station. But they have worked and have the rights to do the games on a number of our campuses. We have one campus with a television station. We've been on. We've got some folks that just put up a stream on YouTube, and at one time I'm like, I don't know about this, but someone made the point to me once. Every phone on earth comes essentially with the YouTube app. Everyone knows how to access YouTube. So we felt comfortable distributing our conference championships across YouTube, but I think we've hit a point that starting to maybe evolve a little bit from that. I don't know what the answer is, whether we can get all 12 folks in one place to where everyone's on the same platform, but I think that we have enough interest that there's a very good likelihood that a majority or a high percentage of our schools end up in that space. And it's a Thursday, so I've got a totally different opinion on behind the paywall or not on the paywall. And I probably had on Wednesday, or I'll have tomorrow. I think it's been really good for the ability, just if people are browsing YouTube or whatever platform, to maybe just come across one of our institutions, see the game. It's great for our student athletes, families. A partial scholarship model. You're asking your student athletes, they're paying to come to your institution. Do you want to add these other charges to student athletes, families to watch games? But on the flip side, there's so much you can do with the investment, as we talked about. The technology never rests. It's there's always another camera, another angle. If we can bring back dollars from a paywall, to all these added, cameras, added angles, do they benefit replay, which becomes more and more, something important to be able to host an NCAA championship. Right now we use replay in many of our sports, and I tell people it's just there to catch the train wreck. We're probably not going to change the 50-50 call. And they're like, well, why do you even have replay? And it's like, well, people make mistakes, sometimes egregious mistakes. It catches those, but, sometimes it really does fix things like, football, targeting reviews. Mm-hmm. Nearly half of our targetings were overturned this year. And in a sport that's student athletes, you only have 44 quarters. If you have to miss 2, 3, or 4 of those quarters because of a safety rule, and I'm I'm probably one of the foremost advocates of targeting. I think that we need to clean it up a little bit. I think maybe, there there's an ejection for an egregious. Otherwise, it takes 2 targetings to be ejected. I was on the football rules committee when the rule was passed, and as someone that has really been involved in that phase of the game for a long time, the behavior of players, you see, coaches have done a great job of coaching out some of those kill shots where they're, if someone's trying to headhunt, and we were in a really, scary place, with conceivably outside agencies coming in to make us make changes to the sport, which I don't think we really wanted to see. And I think targeting, although it's far from perfect in its application, has helped in some ways in player behavior. You don't see some of those reckless tackles that you saw before. So, streaming gives you the ability behind a paywall to really enhance those replays and some of those added technological pieces, and however other ways that, again, it's Division II. Everyone has a finite amount of resources, and any way you can enhance those resources, it's a positive, but it comes at a cost. Either to your student athletes or just just people that wander across your games, maybe are interested and watch for a while. So I'm really interested to see where we end up as a membership.
I'm talking about the sport of football within Division II, and you obviously sit as the chair of the D2 CCA, so you have a added lens maybe to look at this through. How would you describe the position, or how would you assess the position of football in Division II?
Football period right now is such a, the landscape changes so often. I think we offer a great opportunity now for high school student athletes that in past years might have ended up in an FBS or FCS program. And I think we're seeing high school student athletes that our schools might not have been able to recruit or sign 10, 15 years ago, or for that matter, even 5 years ago. I think we get a lot of those student athletes now. I think on the front end, we're getting maybe more talented, skilled players than we've ever gotten before in Division II. But it's a challenge to retain those student athletes. Hey, I'm an Ole Miss grad. It's kind of, as a Division II guy, you hate to see one of someone that in past years would have spent his entire career in Trinidad Chambliss at Ferris State and would have, he already created a great legacy at Ferris, but would have possibly been a division-wide legend had he won another championship this year. But it's great as an Ole Miss fan. It's like, hey, we've got this kid who's just going to be our backup, and he's been amazing. So it's really hard to kind of put your arms around. You're excited for student athletes in your league who maybe have the opportunity. I've seen some of our, we've had all-conference players that were in the portal that were freshmen or sophomores. They're going to play in the SEC next year. That's life-changing for those student athletes. So you want to be able to embrace that, but it's still a little bit painful if you're a small college lifer like I am for the most part, that you can't count on your best players always being around for 4 years. But I think there's going to be some real opportunities within the Division II landscape. But you're always, what are you, what do you lose in all that? But and again, I think a lot of it is, we're kind of captive to what happens to the level above us. I think conceivably I think there's institutions that the partial scholarship model would work much better for them than what they're doing currently. And the Division I landscape may bring some of those people back to Division II. So I think that would be an opportunity. So, changing, I'm not sure that's entirely good, that's entirely bad. But I think it's such a changing landscape that we just have to learn to embrace the different and make that work out the best way that we can make it work out.
Do you feel that, obviously, as we sit here right now, we haven't had the business session yet tomorrow morning, so the resolution around changing the football championship date has not passed or been approved or not approved. The conversation more broadly of where some of the big picture things lie within football specifically. The CCA has been vocal in the past about changes that they would like to make, primarily around brackets. Are there other changes that you would advocate for the sport, either in your commissioner role or in the CCA chair role?
One thing that I'm really proud of as a commissioners association, we've been a lot more active within the past 3 to 5 years. Really post-COVID in trying to, I think largely in the past we were an organization that, we were very inward-looking. It's like, we have this very unique job that, there's only 23 of us that are Division II commissioners. There's less than, you go all the way through Division I, Division II, III, NAIA, there's less than 150 of us, period, that have this role. So I think we were really inward looking and, what are the best processes, how do we support each other? But we've gotten much more involved in trying to, not always legislatively, but an example is the Division II festivals. Our group was very vocal in advocating that we go away from the festival idea that we're bringing multiple sports together to play the spring festival or fall festival, because it created calendar challenges for scheduling in a number of sports. It created issues in some of our neutral side championship hosts, and I think the division next year will have its last multi-sport division festival, but I think Division II is going to be really involved in maybe combining, maybe some men's and women's basketball championships, or conceivably seeing other sports more often combined to play their championship at Division I side. I was in Kansas City about a month ago, had the opportunity to go to the Division I volleyball championship, and and I've really been an advocate of that. Would be an incredible opportunity for, if we're playing the Division I championship in Sprint Arena, the 19,000 seat arena, then it'd be awesome if we could play the Division II Final Four, on days around the Division I Final Four. I think volleyball fans would come just to see volleyball because they love volleyball. Not necessarily in the big venue, but like we've done at basketball, be it a smaller venue in the host city. I would love to see that for some other sports, but I think specifically for football, I think about, we're a big advocate for changing the calendar. We're unique in Division II. We have 12 members. We're unique for college athletics, period, at this point. We have 12 football members. We play 11 conference games. We think it's important to play everyone in the conference. It's been that way since day one of the conference. So we really would love to see an additional week to the season that would push the championship into January, largely so we can do an open date. It would be ideal in our league if we could play 5 or 6 weeks, have an open date, come back, finish the season, because it's really difficult. Harding this year represented our league, played in the national championship game, and they played 16 straight football games at an open date. But I think about, again, the possibility, what about, unbelievable FCS national championship game this year? I mean, that Montana State, Illinois State game is one of the most entertaining football games I've ever watched, period. But, what about if, we were in Nashville, either the day before or day after that, and it's part of a bigger football gathering of, multiple divisions at the same place for for a football championship. I think something like that would be interesting. Football specific, I think it would be really interesting. We went away from it in the early '90s as an association, but schools like Butler used to play Division II football. They were in the Midwest Football Conference, which is the predecessor pretty much to the GLIAC. But what if some of the non-scholarship or low scholarship Division I football programs had the opportunity to play in a 36 scholarship level? And I think that could really help us. We have some areas that we're starting to see out west. Portions of the southeast. It is really worrisome that we're seeing the Division II football footprint really diminished. But if we could figure out ways, to kind of decouple football a little bit from some of the other divisional structures, I think that there would be. I think there would be a reasonably significant number of Division I schools that might be interested in playing a 36 scholarship model.
Actually, two quick follow-ups on that. Do you think there's the appetite for basically opening the door to more multi-divisional sport programs where certain ones obviously been grandfathered in, but adding or opening that up to new schools to enter that, specifically around football?
I'm not sure the appetite's there, but personally I think it should be.
Okay.
I would be a very big advocate of that.
Okay. And then my other question was, playing 11 straight weeks, have you guys, or what's the opposition to participating in week 0?
Week 0 is, I think, a really positive thing for Division II. It opens up some scheduling models for my friends in the GLIAC, the Gulf South. They have a really difficult time scheduling. Our opposition to week 0, to be honest and transparent, it's partially financial because you've got to bring people in a little bit earlier. But I don't know if you've ever checked the weather map in Arkansas or Oklahoma. 3 years ago, if we'd played week 0, the lowest high temperature around our 12 schools that day was 106 degrees.
Yeah, you're talking to somebody that lives in Texas, grew up in South Florida. I'm familiar with the heat. Me and the heat are friends.
So I'll say we would love to see Division II have 13 weeks to play 11 games. Give leagues like ours that doesn't necessarily want to use week 0 the opportunity to slide an open date in there. It gives leagues that for financial reasons might not want to come in week 0. It still offers them a little bit more inventory for non-conference scheduling, and for my friends in leagues that have lower numbers. Hey, every week that provides some sort of inventory, I think helps them in scheduling. So
I'll get you into this last big question, personal to you. You are 29 years as a high school official. You have been open and advocating for changes around officiating, or more maybe respect around officiating specifically. What would your message be to your fellow commissioners, the changes you would advocate for officials, and the opportunity for individuals to get involved in officiating?
I'm really happy to see conference offices in the NCAA. The NCAA in the past has really never been involved in officiating. It's always been, hey, it's a conference issue. It's your problem. You guys deal with it. Now we're starting to see the NCAA support official recruitment. They're doing so much work with RefQuest and RefReps on training and really having more of those developmental pieces out there. I think we're starting to turn the tide a little bit. And I tell people, we're not in a healthy place in officiating when 54-year-old guy like me looks around at our statewide meeting and in Arkansas for high school football officials and like, ooh, I'm one of the young guys in the room. That's not a healthy place for us to be. But I think we're really starting to see the National Federation, state associations across the country, on top of what the NCAA is doing, And I feel like we're starting to turn the tide on that a little bit. And, if I've got 30 seconds to give a quick little sales pitch on why to become an official,
Please.
It's as people become more and more detached from their community, it's an unbelievable way to stay involved with the sport. The people that that are like family to me, that are my go-to friends, are the folks that I've shared football fields with for the last 29 years. They're really like brothers to me. It's given me so much more than I've given to the game. Grateful for that. It's just you're giving back to the next generation that plays the sport, and I would love for any student athlete, that it's like, hey, I don't know if I want to coach, but it's like, hey, talk to someone in your conference office or your state high school association. We can point you in the right direction to get you started. We need you and would love to have you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining me today, providing all these insights.
Hey, I appreciate the time.